friends here. She's going to be talking with you today about some really important stuff. I'm assuming you're here because you're interested in this side of it, the human side, the soft skills side, the resilience. I was telling her that we named our fund EQ Ventures. We have an early stage fund that's focused on pre-seed seed. And a lot of that is because we believe that the emotional intelligence and resilience of the founder is as important, if not more important, than the solutions that they are working on. So without taking any more of her time, I want to get her up here and we'll have you introduce yourself. I'm sorry, I've got... Okay, round of applause, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. If I don't fall on one of these chairs, I'm very excited to be here, very humbled to spend this time here with you. I have a pretty big topic here today. I want to talk to you about building mental resilience and how together we can spend the next 25 minutes sort of brainstorming on how we can overcome our self-doubt and uncertainty. So without further ado, I'm Muralidharan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Expensify. And to kick things off, I actually would love to take you on a personal journey with me. There we go. So I come from an extremely humble, very middle-class Indian family, and I only moved to the United States when I was 25. All of the myths and all of the caricatures that you ever hear or see about very aggressive and ambitious tiger moms were all true for me. And pretty early on in life, my parents kind of drilled it into me that if I wanted the finer things in life, then I would have to work doubly hard than all of my peers because I didn't quite have the same financial opportunities available to me. And I really took this to heart. But kind of complicating the story a little bit, a very common refrain that I would hear all the time when I was a kid was, don't get overconfident. Like that was a word my mom would use all the time. And the idea was, don't dwell on what you're good at because that might make you lethargic or take things for granted, and then you might not be as prepared as you would be otherwise, and that could end up costing you real opportunities. So it was good advice. Instead, her advice to me was always focus on the things you're not so good at so you can improve them and be stronger. Now, it was kind of a double-edged sword because, yeah, she was right. It did make me improve on the things that weren't naturally my strengths, and that made me a stronger person. But implicitly, the message I heard as a child was, don't think about what you're good at because it's not important. That made it really difficult for me, and still makes it very difficult for me to ever be really self-confident or give myself credit for things that I'm good at. As far as I can remember, my entire childhood I spent with my nose kind of buried in textbooks. I was very academically inclined. I was an obsessive preparer. I was chronically over-prepared all the time. And by and large, most of my efforts were pretty successful too. And my obsession was very uniquely pointed at how to find that perfect intersection between what I'm good at and what makes a ton of money. And along the way, many people were very ready to give me what I consider really bullshit advice, which is that money can't buy happiness. I have a theory about those people. I think they're all secretly very rich and they don't want us to, right? So, of course money can't buy happiness and everybody knows that, but money can buy a lot of amazing things, and I wanted the finer things in life, so I was very focused on it. And like I said, mostly the things that I went after, besides an occasional hiccup here and there, I was successful at, I was able to achieve, scholarships, internships, colleges, jobs. I really didn't have what you would call a huge setback at any point in time. So on paper, I was accomplished, I was successful, but none of those achievements ever made me feel any lasting sense of accomplishment, self-confidence, or joy. The best way I can describe this to you is, it felt like, here is a mountain, and it's really challenging to climb this mountain, very challenging to scale it, but once you do it, you're going to feel confident in your ability to do it again and again and again, and you're going to feel joy at that prospect. Except I scaled it, and then I always just found there to be more mountains that were more difficult to scale. It was sort of like a hamster that's stuck on a hamster wheel, and the hamster wheel is only ever going faster. And if that sounds exhausting, it absolutely was. By the time I was in my 30s, I was kind of burning out. I couldn't find joy in anything I did. I was borderline depressed. And it was at that point in time, in what must have been a kind of desperate phase in my life, where I read this quote. And it was by no means the first time I read it, but it kind of hit me like a brick when I read it at that point in time. And this is a quote by Einstein, as very helpfully put in this graphic, but insanity is really doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I realized that's exactly what I've been doing. So I was gripped by this motivation to try to shake things up, to really change how I approached success, about how I approached my work and what was important to me. Except I didn't quite know change it to do what. So at this point in my story, I always irrevocably date myself, but are there anybody in the audience that watched Seinfeld? Yes, at least, when there's at least like a few hands, it feels better. So this is really a 90s sitcom. For those of you that have never seen it, you really should. It ages well. And there's this really funny character called Costanza, who is well-meaning, but sort of what I would call a bumbling idiot. And he always gets into these skirmishes and things go kind of south for him and, gives us comedy gold. But in one of my favorite episodes, his friends make fun of him and say, well, since your instincts are so obviously horrible, maybe you should listen to your instinct and do the exact opposite. And I know this sounds like a made-up story, but very genuinely, I decided to do a Costanza experiment on myself. And I said, okay, most things are tolerable if you set a finite time limit on it. So I said, okay, you know what, I'll give it 2 years. It's 2 years of my life, I'm miserable anyway. I'm going to try to go against my instinct and try to prioritize things I've never ever prioritized before and ignore what my mind is always screaming at me to prioritize. And then let's just see where that gets me. At that point in time, I used to work for a tech company as a VP of sales and business development. Like I said, I didn't enjoy the job, but that title and that money, I was very attached to. During the course of my job, I met David, who was and is the CEO of Expensify. And I couldn't tell you why Expensify, because it wasn't really a well thought out, logical decision. It was just a spark of an idea that I had that, okay, maybe I'll quit this job and I'll pitch him to hire me, and then I'll create my own role at that company. And, almost as soon as I had this idea, I wanted to not do it because I felt vulnerable. I felt quite certain that he would laugh me off or I'd feel rejected, and I didn't want to feel those things, so kind of tried to talk myself out of it. So that was really the first time I implemented my experiment, and I sent that email anyway. To date, I think this is probably the most risky thing I've ever done, putting myself out there. And much to my surprise, he wrote me back within 24 hours, and I got that job. If I were to say here that the next 8 years working at that company and kind of changing my programming completely changed who I was, how I approached success, what I believed to be important, and the joy that I experienced from all of it, as dramatic as it sounds, is a horrible understatement. And even since then, I've always thought to myself, if I had just been able to understand the things that I eventually understood, and if I had that formula a decade earlier, it would have saved me a lot of heartache, a lot of soul-crushing experiences. And so I've taken everything I've learned and tried to distill it into these 3 principles. And I want to share them here with you. And even today when I lose my way, which of course happens often because we're only human, I use it to sort of find my path again. And I hope it will save you decades of soul-crushing experiences and just making the road more arduous than it needs to be. So, the 3 principles, let's get right into it. The first one is manifest momentum. And really the tagline, if you will, for it is talk yourself into it and not out of it. Have any of you ever tried to learn one of these really, like what I call basic skills that people learn as a child, as an adult, like say driving or swimming? I see a few nods. I learned almost all of it as an adult. And as an adult, learning something new is already really difficult, but when it's one of those existential things that you really need to learn in order to survive, and when you see how you have no muscle memory for it, but everybody around you is doing it like it's just second nature to them, it feels really disconcerting, uncomfortable, and you kind of want to give up and not even try, right? So I think the problem with that, and I used to think the problem with that was I'm not able to visualize the end state, and so I feel uncomfortable. But over time, I've changed my mind about that. I think the problem isn't that we're unable to visualize the end state. I think the problem is that we're trying to visualize it at all. Because think about this, like if you don't even know how the controls of your car work, if you're trying to visualize driving it in a really chaotic New York City traffic, or if you're trying to imagine how you will merge into this really busy freeway in LA, the sheer delta between where you are and where you need to get to is very daunting. And it kind of feels like this path is going to be so difficult that why even bother? And it makes us not want to try at all. I'm not a particularly religious person, but there is this concept in the Bhagavad Gita that kind of speaks to this idea of being a karma yogi. And it basically says just focus on the action and focus on it one micro action at a time. And if your action is wholehearted and if your action is of high quality, then have faith that the result will follow, because the result isn't something you can directly control anyway. So going back to my story, when I joined Expensify, the first couple of years at the company, which feels intuitive now, but I didn't really think it through then, were almost more horrible than before. Because as much as I didn't like my job, I had a very set role at my previous company, and I showed up and I did the work, and it was clear people relied on me to do it. But when I took this gig at Expensify, I had taken a pay cut, I had taken this role that wasn't very well defined, so I needed to show up at work and somehow have faith that I was going to get to this place that I'd never been at in my mind, but also be productive and be impactful and figure it all out on my own. So I took a very different route than I usually do. Usually my focus was always about what is the next promotion and how do I get that? And what amount of money will that promotion bring? How do I strategize to get to that level? Instead, this time, I gave up trying to strategize at all. And instead I said, okay, I need to show up at work and I take it one day at a time. And all I need to do is find something critical to do that teaches me something new and brings me joy. And at the end of the day, it's reset. And that was very counter to my personality. And so it was very difficult for me to do, but that's what I did day in and day out. Slowly, getting through the day became getting through the week. And getting through the week became getting through the month. And unbeknownst to me, something magical happened. Because I was identifying and doing tasks and projects that were mission critical but really didn't sit with any specific team. It was spread out all over the business across various functional areas. And because I was doing these different tasks across various functional areas, I ended up learning a lot about the underlying architecture of the business, about how things like our database structure worked, how did our payment flows work, what did banks and regulators want from us, like just a very disparate set of skills, which gave me a fundamental understanding of the business, which became something that enabled me to think of new ideas that got a lot of traction at the company. I was able to spot inefficiencies, but even better, propose solutions to fix them that became widely accepted. I gained a lot of influence and respect as a result of that. And I didn't even try. I can't describe it any other way. It just naturally happened by focusing on the work itself and not focusing on the result. And so the moral of the story, or really like the message I hope you'll take away from this is, the next time you have an amazing idea, the next time you have an amazing problem, a critical problem that you want to solve, don't try to map out the entire strategy. It's just going to make this whole thing more daunting than it needs to be and takes the joy out of it. Instead, just take one step forward, then take another step forward. Because as you take steps forward, the picture kind of becomes a little bit clearer. And if some of those steps are incorrect, it kind of doesn't matter because you'll be in momentum and you'll be able to go back and course correct it just fine and you'll enjoy the process. So have a bias for action and take steps forward and the results will automatically come to you. Which is a great segue into the second principle, which is that tactics matter. Don't just be a strategic expert, but also be a tactical expert. Now, I believe pretty strongly that somebody that does not know how to do the day-to-day grunt work can never really be a strategic mastermind. And if you can't figure out how to implement something, how the various pieces fit together, then I don't really think your ideas can be worth all that much either. So there's a really cool quote actually in Art of War that speaks directly to it. It talks about how strategy without tactics or tactics without strategy, both are not recipes for success. So you need both and they need to go hand in hand in order for you to be successful. To go back to the story again, in those first 2 years at Expensify, like I said, I was always trying to find critical enough tasks that nobody was doing and trying to do them myself in order to sort of define my role and produce a map for success, if you will. But a side effect of that was because nobody was doing those tasks or doing them very consistently, if they were doing it at all, there was no roadmap for how to do them. So it was really just like green field, figure it out and get it done. You would think that that would feel liberating. You would think, wow, you get to do whatever you want, however you want to do it, like that's the dream job. But it actually really isn't. Especially if you're somebody that always doubts yourself in terms of, am I doing this right? Because what I really desperately wanted was for someone to tell me or at least give me some direction in terms of how to do it, and I didn't have that. So I felt like I was wasting my time, kind of reinventing the wheel, and worse, I didn't know if what I came up with was even correct or efficient. Desperately wanted validation, but I wasn't getting it, so I kind of felt like I was just bumbling along. But I worked on this one project and it kind of completely changed the game, changed the story for me. And I want to tell you about that project. It's this extremely unglamorous task, which was to get the company GDPR compliant. And it happened, I want to say 2017, 2018, somewhere around then, where there was new privacy regulation that Europe got behind. And any company that had a European customer base, however small, needed to become compliant with their new regs. Now, and we had to do it, but it was really nobody's day job to do it, so I picked it up. Now, the way that most companies did this was they hired privacy regulation experts, consultants. And those consultants talked to the various stakeholders of the company and came up with a list of gaps that needed to be bridged. Then the company bridged them and then they got certified. Now, it makes sense in retrospect, I just didn't think of it and nobody told me to do it like that. So instead I took the scenic route. I spent a few snoozeworthy weeks reading all of the underlying regulatory literature. And my thought process was, if I understand the risks that it's trying to protect against, if I understand the underlying concerns it's trying to sort of control, then I'll be able to use what I know about the business and business processes to identify the gaps and I can fix them with the right people's help, of course. So that's what I did, and then I submitted for certification. Now, I want to give you the gist of the response I got back, and it went something like this. Miss Anu, your attempts at GDPR compliance are very cute, but you have nearly 100 deficiencies you haven't bridged. So why don't you bridge them and then write us back? You know, for me, my already fragile ego, this was a huge blow because it felt like validation of my worst fears, but I actually didn't know what I was doing and God knows what else I bungled. But here's where things were a little bit different. I had spent that time and I had really read everything with the complete intention of understanding it. And I did understand our business processes. So when I read the things that they believed we needed to bridge, it just didn't make any common sense and it was very jarring. So I went out on a limb and wrote notes for every one of those deficiencies and sent it back with my rationale for why it didn't really apply to us and so we didn't need to do it. Something amazing happened. it still makes me smile because the response I got back was that I was right 9 out of 10 times. So instead of having to bridge these 100 deficiencies, we only really needed to bridge like a handful, which we did. That irrevocably changed how I saw myself. And I have never, and there's not much that happens in your life that is that's just a binary shift, but that was a binary shift. And I've never ever doubted my ability since then, that given enough time and given the right intention to truly bring your best to the task, that I cannot figure anything out. And that gave me the confidence that I always wanted to do the thing from scratch, and then to take feedback and to improve it was really the process I was looking for. So the moral of this story, to bring it back to you, is again, the next time you're trying to work on a project, solve a problem, implement an idea, don't rely on experts of any kind to tell you how to do it, because why would that be innovative? Everybody would be doing it the same way. So come up with your own common sense approach. Let's call that X. Reach out to the people that you think can give you quality feedback, because the whole point is to make it better, but to start with what you know and what you think is the best way to do it. Now, this is kind of difficult to do because when you come up with something and you figure out how to do it, you get really attached to it. So try not to be attached to it. Try not to make it about your ego. And when you reach out for feedback, try to listen with an open mind, because that is probably a version of the solution based on the feedback. Let's call it Y. The perfect solution lies somewhere between X and Y. And the process of finding that perfect solution is in fact what you're looking for. Because once you do that, and once you see that is successful, you'll never doubt your ability to ever figure it out again, and figure it out again, and so on and so forth. So the tactics matter, your creativity and your common sense approach matters. So lean on that. Now, last but not the least, build your team. You won't be able to do it on your own. You can't do it on your own, and it really matters who's in your court. Now, even if you have the best of intentions and you really bring your best to bear and you do things with creativity and common sense, you still can't really completely control your environment. So try to optimize your environment. And one of my pet peeves is actually, when I have an idea and it's very vulnerable in its very initial stages, I sometimes end up sharing it with the wrong person. And they, with the best of intentions, poke these million holes in the idea, try to give me feedback, try to get me to tweak it, question the relevancy of the idea itself to the market. And the sum total of all that is just a total buzzkill, and you will just never do it at all because, whoa, that was a horrible experience. So when you think about your team, and by team I mean like your support system, you need to have people that play different kinds of roles in it, because at different points in time, you need different kinds of partnerships. Sometimes what you need is just a cheerleader. Other times what you need is a collaborator. And yet other times you actually might need someone that gives you a great reality check. So diversity is very important, not just for the sake of it, but for bringing different ideas, bringing different perspectives, and improving upon your solution. So if you haven't thought about that, if it doesn't come to mind who would be in your court, then go out there and find one person today, because it's the most important thing you can do for yourselves and your companies. So, a recap: manifest momentum, take a step forward. Tactics matter, because you can't be a strategic whiz kid if you don't really know how to do anything. And build your team, because your support system is very important. Now, having spent the better part of the last 30 minutes on overcoming self-doubt, I want to leave you with something. If you haven't heard Angela Duckworth's TED Talk, I highly recommend it. But it basically talks about the fact that extensive research has gone into looking at what is a good predictor of success. And it's not IQ, it's not charm, it's not resources you're born with or acquire, it's actually grit. Perseverance is apparently the most consistent predictor of success. So think about the self-doubt that you hate so much. In a sense, that self-doubt makes you work harder, makes you grittier, makes you persevere more and prepare more. And so while you're working on overcoming it, just recognize that this thing which is your Achilles heel is probably also your strength. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. Good luck with all of your endeavors, and if you have any questions, I'm here. Cheers.
Thank you so much. We do have some time for questions over here. We have time for just like one or two quick questions. Yeah?
Hi, thank you for the talk. It was really good. As someone who's the opposite personality of like planning is very difficult for me. I go with the flow day by day, and like trying to plan and execute is where it's a challenge. I was wondering, like, when you took this approach of going against your instincts, where did you incorporate your planning side, or like in your day to day, or you know, having some structure still?
So that's a fantastic question. I kind of struggle with it. Structure particularly because I don't love it. But the planning thing is, my instinct is to exhaustively plan. So I kind of have to control myself in the thing that you want to do is the thing I need to control in me. I would say the best thing you can do, especially if it's at work, if it's in starting your own company, is in having a complementary partner. Because for me, it's the people that I've worked with that have been my reality check. And when I overcorrect in one direction, they pull me back. So to me, it's really important that you have somebody you trust at work, at home, in your own company, that you can rely on to be sort of the yin to your yang. And that may be a good way that you can keep bringing yourself back.
Thank you so much. We've hit our time, and we've got to let Anuradha go. Thank you.
Thank you.